Okay, sorry. We've already been talking here for about 45 minutes. So, but anyway, where was if they were have come, to the congregation where I was preaching or working, then they would have to tell us about, who's your sponsoring congregation. It's just like if I were to say, okay, I'm going to come to Cartersville and I want to do mission work up at Fairmount and I need some support. I'm going to be the evangelist up there. Just say that's what I said. I'm going to be the evangelist up there. Well, in other words, you're going to be the full-time preacher and evangelist. You're going to be doing evangelical work is the idea that I would say, knocking on doors and things like that, setting up Bible studies, more so, but also preaching. And so then I'd maybe come over at Rome where Jason goes to the church and so forth, and go up to Kentucky where Nikki is and so forth, and and try and get support. But they're going to eventually say, well, who is your sponsoring congregation? Says, where do we send our money? Well, with the ultra conservative groups, you send the money directly to the preacher. And then like with us at Cartersville, we send our money to sponsoring congregation. Now we do have preachers. In other words, like if say for instance, Barry Hatcher's over Indonesia, and he was over there, and then they had that big problem that came up there, political problem, and he sent his wife and children out of the country. Well, he needed extra support because he's going to have to stay there. And so we sent it directly to him. We didn't send it directly. Well, we may have sent it directly to the sponsor congregation, but I thought we ought to send something directly to him, or it might have been another person that needed the money right then. And so we sent it. And so we had a preacher that we were supporting, and that's what we did with him. We would send him money when he needed it. Everybody sent money to us at Cartersville, and we dispersed the money. There are different ways that we do it, but the thing of it is to make sure that it's being kept up with, that in reference to the contribution that's being given. He says Basil Overton, Brother Overton, was a preacher, I want to say in Alabama for many years. I can't remember where he was, but he's got a couple of books out written, very good book. I want to say good book on apologetics. I can't think of the name of it. There's a God in Heaven, I think is the name of it. But he wrote in a book called, wrote an article in Gospel Advocate, 1969, The Work of a Preacher. And he said the idea that doing, quote, evangelist work, means the evangelist does not preach regularly for one congregation, but instead he goes from place to place preaching, is a distinction not based on anything the Bible says about the work of an evangelist. The gospel preacher preaching God's, how did I get the small s there? I mean, small g there again. I'm going to correct that. God's truth on any subject, anywhere, is doing the work of an evangelist. Now, in other words, they separate themselves from that because they said, well, we don't do local work, we do evangelistic work, we go to different places. Well, they still got to have a sponsoring congregation, or not. We had, when my first located work, we had a fellow that we sent the money directly to him. We didn't have a sponsor congregation. So the elders, before I got there, they went over there and they were supporting him. Then when I got there, they went back over there to check on him and everything like that. And they saw some things they didn't like, and they questioned him about his support and everything. And they were giving him $40 a month. He said, well, you just keep your money. I don't need it. He wasn't going to answer any of the questions that the men of the congregation wanted answered, because they were sending the money over. They wanted to know something, And in other words, they were sending money over there, and the contribution over there wasn't anything. He wasn't giving anything to the contribution to the church there, it seemed. So whether or not one is an evangelist is determined not by the length of the time he stays at a place, but what he does while located. So if you're located, just say, for instance, that, yes, I'm located right here at Cartersville, and I'm going to do evangelistic work, let's say up at Fairmount, but I'm going to live here, and they're going to send me up there, or they may send me somewhere else. But this is where I'm located, right here. This is where I'm going to be, is right here at Cartersville. So they know, the elders would know my work and what I was doing. And so wherever I'm located, I'm going to be doing the work of a preacher, and also should be doing the work of an evangelist. That is, we knock on doors, we evangelize. That's the word that word comes from. And the point is does he proclaim the good message, that is the gospel of Christ? Paul was an evangelist. That is, he was in Acts 20, verse 31, a messenger of good, or a gospel, I can't say that word there, gospelizer. Mr. Dr. A.T. Robertson, a Greek scholar, that was his definition of an evangelist, gospelizer, gospelizer. And so Paul stated that the Ephesians, he stayed there nearly 3 years. So he was located there, but he was a messenger of good. He was an evangelist there. That's what he was doing. If you recall, he's going on missionary journeys. That would be what we would call, or what the religious world would call evangelist, see, that he was doing this evangelic work. But yet he stayed there for nearly 3 years. And also he stayed a little over 2 years at Corinth. So, but he was doing evangelistic work. He talked about his missionary work. And so the declaration, not the duration, determines the work of an evangelist. Is he preaching and teaching the gospel? Yes. And so that's a false view that people have, that he has to be one who travels all the time. He doesn't do located work. Another false view that Brother Holland talks about is the view of another false notion relative to the nature of an evangelist, is that he preaches only to the lost and not to the church. So that would simply mean there's no way. I mean, if you had a church building and you were calling people in and you had me there as an evangelist, then I'm there. Am I not also, if I'm teaching and it's members of the church and not members of the church, then I'm teaching both, right? The answer would be yes. And so here it is that he says here that this is this notion that he's just there to preach to the lost. Now, if we were to go, say all four of us, all of y'all says, well, Bible, we'll come down there and help you at Fairmount knock on doors. We're evangelizing. We're doing evangelistic work and doing that. The church here at Carsville went up to Fairmount some years ago, and that's what we did. We spent a whole day up there knocking on doors, passing out materials and not tracts, and setting people up for Bible studies and things of that sort. And so we evangelized. Now, it wasn't just me. It was men and women and teenagers that went up there and done that. I might have been the oldest one up there. No, Jerry Bohan was up there. He's older than I am. So you can see there, one cannot announce news to those who had already heard it. Heard it. Heard it. It would not be news to them. So that's a false thing, is that when I made a lot of mistakes there. I thought I corrected all of them. When one studies Paul's epistles to preachers he's fighting, I guess, he's having about preaching, it becomes evident in doing the work of the evangelist, one must teach the church to distinguish between the lawlessness and the glorious gospel of the blessed God, 1 Timothy 1. Now, he was telling Timothy in reference to that, and Timothy's a local preacher there, but he's supposed to be doing the work of an evangelist and fulfill his ministry. See? And so the brethren must be put in remembrance, 1 Timothy 4 and verse 6, of the things which they already knew relative to the departure from the faith. Now, Peter says that in 1 Peter 5, he says he's an elder, right? There, and he writes to the people that are dispersed. He says, "I will put you in remembrance." So that would be an evangelistic work that he was doing. He was writing and so forth. Any thoughts on those two? On those there, we've talked about 1 Timothy 9 through 11. He says there, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers and fathers, the murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for being stealers, for liars, for perjured persons, if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was committed to my trust. And so here it is. He says you need to put them in remembrance. In 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 6, if I put the brethren in remembrance of these things, thou shalt be a good minister. Now that's a minister of Jesus Christ, nourished up in the words of faith and a good doctrine, wherein unto thou hast attained. So he would be a good servant, good minister by doing so. Now again, Brother Overton, in that same article, or another article, I think the other one's in November, stated, one who is an evangelist must proclaim the gospel to those who are not Christians, but obviously he must also preach to the truth to those who are Christians on all matters that have to do with Christian work, worship, and growth. Now, we had a fellow that come in held a gospel meeting up in Tennessee, in Memphis when I was up there, and we knocked on doors and everything. He came, and we invited people all over that city, that area of Memphis. We spent time up there during the day and afternoons knocking on doors and inviting people to come, and they had a great group of people that came. And so we did evangelistic work that week, inviting people to come, and he got up and he preached. Now, he preached members of the church, but he preached to people that were not members of the church. So he was doing it. We look at the way some people want to describe the two words, is that he was preaching to the members and he was evangelizing the sinners. So, so that's the idea that some people have. And so that is a false view. Another, any point, questions? Another false view of an evangelist, number 3, another misconception relative to the evangelist is that he is the pastor of the church. Now, you're going to be called the pastor, okay? I ate breakfast with two Baptist, to a New Testament Baptist church, independent Baptist church, and a missionary Baptist church, and a Pentecostal. Let me think of what they called themselves. They weren't the Assembly of God, Holiness Church. They were the Holiness Church. I had breakfast with them. We ate breakfast just about every morning. We would get discussions about things, and they always called me a pastor. He says, when I first went in, they said, well, they introduced me to somebody. He's the pastor at the Carsville Church of Christ. Well, I broke them with that. I told them, I said, I'm not a pastor. I'm a preacher. Well, no, you're a, no, I'm not. And so we had a good discussion about the word pastor, about the word presbyter, about the word overseer and bishop, and also the word elder. We talked about all of those. And I said, I am not one of those. And because we sit there, and this one fellow was the pastor of that independent Baptist church, but he was divorced, and his wife left him, and so on, and so so he didn't look upon himself. He kept calling himself a pastor. See, they look at it as a pastor as a shepherd, and the word pastor actually means to feed. And so, as we'll see here in a minute. So, the word pastor means a shepherd. The verb form of the word pastor was used by Paul in Acts 20, verse 28. He's talking to the elders now of Miletus. And he also when he instructed the bishops or the overseers to feed, that is, pastor the church, the word was used by the apostle Peter when he charged the elders to feed the flock in 1 Peter 5, verse 2. That's what it means. So I have responsibility. The elders have responsibility to have the church, to feed the church. That's the reason why we as preachers, we're under the eldership just like members are. And if we don't have elders, the preacher doesn't become, quote, the pastor, or in other words, the overseer of everything. He's still just a member, just like everybody else. But yet, that's the reason how that the elders can come to the preacher or the evangelist, whatever you want to call him, they go to him and say, this is what we want you to preach on. We want you to preach a series. We like with me, I was at Conyers, they wanted to appoint some deacons, and they said, we want you to preach on deacons. Same thing happened down at Leeds, Alabama. I want you to preach on deacons. So we're getting ready to appoint some more deacons and so forth. And so when I was at Conyers, I just simply asked them, I said, well, you got people that like to be deacons, but you got some people that don't want to be the deacon over, we'll say, the church building. They don't want that. And so we had one fellow, it's hard for him to read, so he didn't want to be the deacon over education. I said, well, what would you want to be? He said, I'd put my name on that list, but I said, well, go up there and put your name on what you want to do and be a co-deacon on something else. Well, he did. He wanted to be, chaperone, like chaperone, you'll carry you to your seat and stuff like that, what you call it. I even taught a class on that so that they would be able to do it correctly. Usher, yeah. we did a class on ushers because that's what he wanted to do, and he was a good one. I mean, in reference to that of getting members seated right, and also making sure that the visitors that we had, he'd make sure they'd have a visitor's card to fill out. I mean, he was just great. He could not be because he wasn't educated, enough to be a deacon over education. So I asked people, they put down a list. And so these people wanted to be deacons of certain things. And so that's where they appointed them. They gave them a work they wanted to do. They didn't give them something, so you got to do it. It was a work they wanted to do. And I was surprised because they appointed, I think it was 12 or 13 deacons, and there was no complaining at all because they were in charge of one, and then they were a helper in another one. I think that's the way it worked. So, but elders are to see to it that the flock is being fed. Now, are they supposed to feed the flock? The answer is yes. They're supposed to be teachers of the flock. We had a fella, I didn't know the fella, I was told about him that he wanted to be an elder. They wanted him to be an elder, but he would not be an elder because he couldn't teach a Bible class at church building. But he was a great personal worker. I'm talking about he taught people in their homes, and they tried to, and eventually he became an elder. And I mean, he started teaching at there at the church building, a class, and he was great, because of all the experience he had. But he just simply didn't feel like he was that good of a teacher to teach a bunch of older people or people that had more knowledge than he had. But he was a great personal worker. But he eventually became an elder. But it took him a long time to become an elder because he just didn't feel like he was able to do that. The word there, actually, you notice we put it here again. What you see in italics is the meaning of the word, and what you
Bobby.
see. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
So if he taught people in their homes, that's still teaching.
Yeah, but he took it that over where he's supposed to be a teacher, he took it that he's supposed to be teaching at the congregation, and he would not do it until he he just didn't have the confidence to teach a bunch of grown up people, but he could teach them in their home. And I said,
Right.
I was kind of like you. I said, well, he's teaching, and he said, well, he believes that it has to be a class, and so they got him to teach a class, and therefore he was a great man, But it's just go ahead.
I know an elder. He would teach like middle school. He would teach home Bible studies. He would teach in a prison ministry, but he wasn't a good auditorium teacher.
Yeah.
And I told him, as long as you teach, it don't matter. You don't have to teach an auditorium.
Right.
So.
Well, I think that's what someone did with him is they wanted him to teach the adult class, and he didn't do it. I think that was the problem with him. He just didn't feel like he could be to teach that class because basically. But to me, it would have been the best one because he'd been teaching people in their homes, and he had to answer all kinds of questions. So if that adult Bible class had visitors, he would be able to answer the question. But it was just him, and they didn't push him in. But he eventually, my understanding was became an elder, and was a good one. So, but you have people that have those little hangups when you start pointing elders and so forth. And I taught a class for weeks on that, and one of the younger fellows that he couldn't be a deacon, he couldn't be a elder, he could be a deacon. Two of them, they wanted to talk about the qualification. I says, look, we've already talked about these. I've been here all these years, and we've talked about these qualifications. We've talked about these qualifications, and I'm not going to spend the time talking about the qualifications. I'm going to spend the time that this is what the work of the elder is. I talked about the work because I went through them right quick and said, this is what they are. And I said, I know there are questions about this one, about how many children it's supposed to have, about this and about this. I said, we're not going to discuss that. We've already discussed it. And therefore, we've come to the conclusion on that, and we went on. And I think they finished the class, but I'm not really for sure now. I think after about 2 or 3 classes, they quit coming. And but I talked about the work because we had people that had the qualifications, but did they want to do the work? And so, we appointed 4, and we still have 3 of them, and they do a great job. Peter there uses that word too. Again, he also used up there, put this word. Now he says a herdsman. Notice what he says now. The herdsman is the meaning of the word. He says especially a shepherd. And that's why in the denominational world, they look more of it as a shepherd. He also goes on and points out it's a flock of sheep. Peter used the word feed in 1 Peter 5:2, and he says there to feed, to tend a flock, keep sheep. And then he points out there, Thayer does to rule, govern, to furnish pasturage or food, to nourish. Now, trench there says that the word, there are 2 Greek words, and he goes on and says, boskan, to feed, oversight, and then poimene, to tend or nourishment down there, if you'll notice there on page 44, are often employed. Like in, I thought this was interesting. A lot of times people will preach on Peter, you know, and Lord says, Peter, feed my sheep. And we always use the idea, he's using the word agape, and then Peter answering back with Philo. But something there that's very important is that Jesus uses first this word bosque there, which, if like I said, it means to feed. And so he's asking Peter, will you feed my flock? And so, and then also he uses that other word too, a boy made name, to tend, to nourish, and are both often employed. And so here Jesus used the first one. Then secondly, he used that one. Then returning back on the last time, he goes back to the idea to feed. In other words, he asked him, will you feed the flock? And then he asked him, will you rule and govern them? And, you know, things of that sort. He's asking, using both words to involve that word there, to rule, govern, involves much more. The whole office of the shepherd, the guiding, the guarding, the flock, folding of the flock, as well as finding, as the finding of that of nourishment for it. See, both of those words carried that. And that's what he was asking Peter. Yeah, Peter was answering Philo. Jesus was using agape, and he was using Philo. Understand that, but Jesus was trying to make sure that he understood that this is what he wanted him to do. So the pastors, if you want to use that term, are also identified in the New Testament as that of elders or bishops. And you can look at this, and I use this when I'm dealing with the Mormons. I use this number 2 there. Acts 20 verse 17, he calls them elders. Then Acts 20 and verse 28, he calls them overseers. So in the Mormon church, you know, they have the elders. That's the teenage boys, 18, 19-year-old boys running around calling themselves elders. But I pointed out to him, I said, well, right here, he says those same people are overseers. And they can't answer. That's what my daddy said. And I said, well, we're not talking about what your daddy said. We're talking about what the Bible says, you know. And that's what the Bible says. Okay, I got 7:33. Y'all want to take a break? Okay, Jim's
hey, Bob, before we take a break, can I ask you one quick question?
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna make sure I got this in my mind right. So, an elder must be apt to teach, right?
Yes, sir.
And in 1 Timothy 3:2,
Right.
but in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 24, if I'm not mistaken, that's talking about Christians, and it says Christians must be apt to teach.
Yeah.
So,
See?
if you're a Christian, you got to be apt to teach.
Yeah. See, I have in my possession, Brother Roy Hearn had a qualifications for an elder, qualifications for deacons, qualification for Christians. The only difference is that a person can, to be an elder or deacon, you had to be married and have children. But you can be a Christian without being married and have children. You know, see the point that he was trying to make?
Right.
And so the whole idea is that, yes, every Christian ought to be able to teach. That's Hebrews 5 verse 12. You ought to be teachers. See, he says, but I got to go back and reteach it. And so the same thing with our Timothy when he's writing to Timothy. They were supposed to be teachers. And so, like with that man, nobody could say, well, he's not a teacher, because, like you said, you know, he was teaching that house to house, we would say, but he was a teacher. But in his mind, he thought the elder had to teach the congregation. That's the way he looked at it, because he's an elder. He's over the congregation, and he's supposed to feed them, the congregation. That's the way he was looking at it. And so eventually, like I said, you know, I wouldn't have any problem if he had said, okay, I'll do that, and then worked himself into that, because that's what really happens a lot of times. You'll have men who become elders, and they've been teaching children, so like that. They've never probably taught an adult class, and all of a sudden they're asked to teach an adult class, and they say, well, I've never done that before. Well, you're an elder, and it's time for you to move on up there and, you know, show the leadership that you should. And they do. I've never had one refuse. So. You know, but it's a growth.
I know some elders that they have taught classes, but they weren't very good. But you know, still they tried, they taught, but they don't mean they're good at it.
Yeah, a lot of times
some people say they can lead singing, but they're not good at it.
Well, you know, again, they are supposed to grow like everybody else, you know, as elders, in that of their knowledge. And a lot of times you have some that, they can teach you 101 and feel comfortable, but they don't feel comfortable. I don't that pressure, I guess. But being an elder is it's a great work, but it is work. And so for him to be an elder, I mean, he's going to have to talk to the congregation. And like with our elders switch. They have one's in charge this month, and next month somebody else, and next month somebody else, and then they get sick or are going to be gone or something. Somebody takes their place, but when he comes back, he finishes out his month. And that's the way they work it, so that they're always before the congregation. And we've had compliments for people who moved in to the congregation, and they'll talk about it. So, but your elders, it says they're always involved in directing the congregation. And basically the elders close our services. I say close, they get make nice announcements need to be made, and then somebody else leads us in a song, and then we have prayer. They don't lead the prayer all the time, but they basically close the get up and make some closing remarks. If you've heard something that you need some explanation, let us know. If you know, and that type of thing. They have a little spiel they say, because they want people to know. So, okay, is that enough? Did I answer that? Okay, well, Bobby, it's
Yes, sir. Thank you.
all right. Okay, we got down there. We was talking, I think point number 4 there. It is possible for a preacher to be a pastor, elder, overseer, bishop if he meets the qualifications. Now, some congregations don't want the preacher to be an elder, but there's nothing wrong with him being an elder. The only problem is that when they're dealing with keeping you as the preacher and things like that, you have to, you're not in those meetings, or if they're going to raise your salary or something like that. When I was an elder, when they were going to talk about me, I would leave and let them talk, and whatever they said. But I don't really think I left many of those, because they said, no, you don't have to leave. We'll talk in front of you. So they said, we ain't got anything now. Well, but he can be, but he would not be the pastor, because the New Testament recognizes plurality of that of bishops in one congregation, Philippians 1:1. So him of wisdom has arranged this system, a system. Now, a preacher may, elders who want to make the preacher into the pastor of the church, or bishops who are directly in their duty, they don't carry out and do what they're supposed to do, and who let this condition develop in the church, need to understand that this is not God's will, and they need to rectify the situation. I learned what I learned. When I first started preaching, people come to me. I try to because the places I were my work when I was preaching in the school of preaching, I was just men of the congregation. They made I was just a Bible class teacher and a preacher there, and they did they didn't make any decisions. So I didn't have to go for any kind of decisions making that they were doing. They did it on their own, because they were there, and I wasn't. I was just there on Sunday. And but when my first located work, people would come to me, and the only thing I could do, I said, well, we can, I'm new, I don't know what's going on, and so I just would say, like, we can ask the men of the congregation, if it's a woman that came to me and her husband's not a member. And I said, well, we can ask the men of the congregation in a business meeting. We can call a business meeting. And then when I went to a congregation where there were elders, when people started complaining or they wanted to know something, I said, well, you need to go ask the elders and let them tell you, because that's their responsibility. It's not mine as a preacher, because I don't want to put myself in a position where that they would be, I guess, cause a problem between me and the eldership. If the person to ask me something another from a standpoint that I can answer, I'll go ahead and answer. But if it's something we're going to be doing or something like that, they'd like to see done, then I tell them to see the elders. Or if it's something, say for instance, if it's something about the building, I tell them to go see the deacon who's in charge of the building. That's what I do. I'm not going to do his work. I then got chewed out one time for doing that. I put in a light bulb, got chewed out. From a deacon, it's supposed that was his job. So but that's the reason why you have those people. So, so here, this is basically has come to view in reference to that, in that of the denominational world. Most people don't realize it, but in the Baptist church, the deacons run the church. But it's the pastor that tells everybody what to do. And then if enough of the deacons get together and they don't like him, then they fire him. So, that's the way it was in the Missionary Baptist Church I went to. So, but another low view of preaching prevails in some quarters today, and that's the preacher is primarily a promotional parent. And I think we made mention of this earlier, that they were looking for a person to promote the congregation. He is to promote all the programs of the congregation by parroting the slogans and the sales pitches of the marketing world. And I mean, I always try to, if Brother Hornback there, if he needs people to in our worship, and which we have that fixed for people to volunteer, they fill out a little questionnaire, what they want to do, so forth. They choose the things they want to do, and he has a list of that. See, if we didn't have that, and he basically was going to do that, and maybe he said something, and if I was the preacher or if I was one of the elders, I would just get up and say, if y'all want to be a part of our worship and take a part in our worship, then you need to see Brother Hornback and give him your name, tell him what you want to do. But see, we made up a list, and so they could choose what they wanted to do. And that makes it a whole lot easier on him. And when we do that, and ever so often we do it, I think we do it about once a year, but most of the time when we have new members, those forms are given to them for them to choose what they would like to do. And if we have new converts, we after about 3 months, we'll go up to them and give them the thing and say, how about filling this out for us if you want to do some things, or just when you get ready to do something, let us know. If you want to wait on the table or like that, just let us know. If it's women, they want to make the Lord's Supper, then fix the Lord's Supper, then we do that. So because you're trying to get everybody to work. So some brethren, he says here, Brother Overton, some brethren eventually evidently think of if they can get a preacher who will do promotional work, the church will grow. The church is that if a preacher is charged with the responsibility of fully preaching the word and is allowed the time required for study in order to do this, the church where preaches will likely grow. I mean, people are coming. People like somebody to be, I won't say not a comedian or anything like that, but be outgoing and be talking and stuff like that to people. I cut up and carry on a lot of foolishness with members of the church, with the teenagers and so forth, the small kids. But when I get my Bible class, or when I get in the pulpit, I'm a serious person. I mean, I'm serious about what I'm doing. I mean, you can have fun, but you got to be serious in the Bible class, and you got to be serious in the pulpit, because you want people to listen to what you got to say. And so that's what he said. So another modern, and any comment on that? I want you to be a promoter. I had an elder tell me that in the congregation where I was. He told me I was a promoter. And so I promoted all right. I did all kinds of personal work. Promoted. Another modern false view of an evangelist is that he is a congregational community errand boy. Now, probably boy there should have been man, but that's how you put it. Wayman D. Miller states in the Firm Foundation in 1969. Now, you notice that Brother Overton and also Brother Miller here, they're writing for two different journals, or two different magazines, however you want to call them, papers, that one is in Tennessee and one's in Texas, and they're writing about this thing. So I don't know. I wasn't a member of the church at that time, but no, I wasn't a member of the church at that time. And so there might have been some issues that were coming up about preachers and so forth, because the Memphis School of Preaching had just begun, and there might have been others that was beginning. I don't know. But Brother Miller states, he said, churches seeking preachers want to know his age, education, years of experience, if he had a good personality, if he is such a fervent personal worker, and that he will make as many calls as a Fuller brush salesman. Now, that might have been an exaggeration, but there were times that, and I used to get the Gospel Advocate and Firm Foundation. I get the Gospel Journal now. And sometimes they were advertising for preachers in there. And when you would read it, the Apostle Paul couldn't feel it for the qualifications they were looking for. And so these, it must be realized, are but invented and arbitrary qualifications God has not assigned the gospel preacher in his work, however expedient and desirable they may be as additional qualities. I mean, people want someone. I'm trying to remember every congregation I went to, they had other people who tried out also. And, I was just me, so I was hired. So in some places I went, there's 2 places I went. The deacons of those 2 congregations, they were in the same state, but the deacons wanted to hire me. I mean, right quick. They said, "Yeah, that's who we want you to hire," and the elders didn't hire me. And but that was their prerogative. It didn't bother me. I found someplace else to go anyway. So, but that's what some think, that he's, like Brother Miller is saying. Now, since preachers don't work, notice how that's said there, and have so much free time, some imagine they can direct all the community fundraising projects, manage the league ball clubs, organize promotional schemes of the civic clubs, and stay on 24-hour call for school functions. They want you to be involved. Now, I try to get involved in my community with my children. They play ball. I try to help every way that I possibly can for my children, okay, and things like that. But I was a member of the JCs. They started JC place where I was, and it was first started, and so they wanted me to be a part of that. Some of the members did, so I did, but I didn't allow that to take over my time for study and doing personal work. It's just like right now, the Vietnam Veterans of Bartow County, they meet on Tuesday nights, the 3rd Tuesday of every month. So I don't get to go because I teach on Tuesday nights. The Purple Heart Society, which I'm a member of that, they meet, I think it's the first Monday, first Monday of every week. But I have a class. I don't. I do the streaming, but I have a class on Monday. Now I have 2 classes on Monday if I want to take them, but I do the streaming. So I got other things to do. And so, you stay busy, but my work as a preacher, it comes first. It's just that way. It comes first. And so, any question on that? Too many preachers have sacrificed their work on altars of community service. There's nothing wrong in being involved in your community. I think it's good. And the instructors that I had in school and graduate school, they would encourage you, but your work, you've been hired to be a preacher, and that's your work. And that's your major task, is preaching and teaching God's word. There is no way to rationalize community involvement when one ceases to do the work of an evangelist in order to do the work of the community. Now, when I did things in the community, the people that I was involved with, I tried to set up Bible studies. Eventually they got tired of me doing that, so they didn't care whether I came to their meetings or not. But that's what I tried to do. But it's not good public relations for the church when the price paid for community involvement is superficial preaching, shallow Bible teaching, and lost souls neglected. My first responsibility is to the congregation that has hired me. That's the way I look at it. It's my job. And yes, it's 724. Like I said, we talked before about having office hours and things like that. We'll mention that some more. The brethren must be educated to appreciate the preacher's task is to preach, not be a professional social worker for the church. And I did counseling. I did grief recovery for people, members of the church and members not members of the church. So again, I could have Bible studies if I possibly could, set Bible studies with those people. And so it was just ways that I could do that, but it was something that could offer the congregation too. Any congregation that thinks a preacher has enough physical and emotional stamina to do the works of the elders, the deacons, and the preacher too, fails to appreciate the limitations of preachers and or does not understand the nature of the work of an evangelist. like I said, I've been blessed in my work. I don't know how other preachers, how they're been treated and so forth, but in places that I've been, I've had the men of the congregation, the elders of the congregation. You need to take some time off. I said, well, I don't want to use my vacation to do this. No. This is just extra time. You take off. You go somewhere. You and your wife and children go somewhere this weekend. And sometimes even they'd offer to pay. They said, because I did my work, and so and you appreciate people that way. The church at Conyers, the elders after my first year there called me in, says it's summertime, your kids are out of school. We don't want you setting up Bible studies just for about every night. We want you to spend time with your children during the summer months. When school starts back, then, because anybody that came to our services, I tried to set up a Bible study with them. If they are members of the church and they move into that area, I visit them. Me and some of the deacons and so forth, and sometimes the elders, we would visit together. And so they wanted me to take off. And I really appreciated that. My family appreciated it. But my work is to do the work of a preacher. Perhaps more preaching needs to be done about that, that's not supposed to be there, about the nature of preaching. It is a Bible subject. Until the brethren and the preachers understand the work of an evangelist, there will be unrealistic demands made of preachers and unjust criticism of his work. And so, like I said, on some of the Facebook pages and so forth, some of these fellows talk about their work and so forth, and you get emails and so forth. I do talking about some of their works, and so the thing of it is that if you're doing your work, you stay at a place a pretty long time. Now, sometimes preachers just want to move. I know of a preacher, he stayed 2 years at every place he went, and after 2 years, he resigned and found another place to go. And but that's the way he was. And finally, when he got older, he started staying longer. So, but until brethren know and appreciate what the Bible says relative to the work of an evangelist, it will be difficult for the evangelist to be occupied with preaching. He will have trouble mastering the major task. And that's his major task, is to preach the word of God. Because you're going to get up, and not like I've gotten up, and you're going to preach. And your preaching is supposed to be doctrinal preaching. And which we'll talk about in just a few moments. You're going to have to listen to what the members are saying, because they're you're encouraging them to do personal work, encouraging them to invite people to services. And so they're going to have to answer questions. So in Bible classes and even in sermons, you're going to have to make sure that you're feeding them what they need so they can do their work as a child of God. And sometimes people are going to ask you to preach on certain things for that purpose. I'm going to bring my friend, and he wants to know why we don't use the instrument. I'm going to bring my friend, he wants to know why that we immerse instead of sprinkle and pour, things like that. And so you can preach on those things because you're trying to help in the congregation. I found in a congregation, like when I went to the congregation, came out of the Baptist church, I found that I got up and preached doctrinal sermons. And in my Bible classes, I did the New Testament books, verse by verse, and I didn't choose. I chose, the epistles, so we could teach on those and get people to see what was in those, not only just there, but elsewhere in the New Testament. It was like, because they had a problem with the Godhead, they had a problem with what a person had to say in reference to when you baptize someone, and some of the issues. And so when you're teaching a book that way, and you come up on the word church, so you can spend a lot of time speaking about the church from the other epistles. And that's what I did. And, a lot of questions were answered. I had people go out and say, I've often wondered about that and had a question about that, but you answered it tonight or this morning. I really appreciate that, like that. And so, a person can do that. Our major task is mastering our work. Mastering our work is preaching and teaching the gospel, the word of God. Now, anything else? Now, he says to him in 2 Timothy 4, verse 5, do the work of an evangelist. We talk about that. He also admonished Timothy to make full proof of his ministry. There are some notes on page 41, and I'm not going back there. That's the reason I put the word note there. So go back, you can read the notes we made on 2 Timothy 4 and verse 5. The word minister means servant. Okay, one who executes the commands of another, especially of a master, a servant, attendant, minister, It represents these. Now here's Thayer's comments. Represents the servant in his activity for the work, not in his relation, either servant, as that of doulos. Doulos is the word for slave, servant, or more voluntarily, as in the case of the word therapon, to a person. Now, Baxter, in his lexicon, he says one who, notice the word there, diakonos, that's the word we call it deacon. Okay, one who renders service to another, an attendant, servant, one who executes a commission, a deputy. Then he says this, and this is Tom Holland, he's emphasizing this, a commissioned minister or preacher of the gospel. That's what Baxter says in his lexicon. So in a sense, when you look at this, in a sense, all Christians are to be deacons. All right, now this, because we use that word, but we have to realize that if we say deacons, there is an office for a deacon. Okay, so most of the time we say servants. We used to do at Conyers. We would say we're going to have a meeting tomorrow night with the elders. Going to have a meeting with all the deacons and other servants, because we had some people who were not deacons. They weren't qualified to be deacons, but they were other servants. They were doing other things, or they weren't appointed a deacon. They didn't want to be one or whatever. And but there was a special class with distinct qualifications who were to serve S-E-R-V, as deacons. 1 Timothy chapter 3, beginning in verse 5, down to verse 8. So furthermore, now Brother Miller says, the scriptures abundantly sustain the idea that the term minister is employed in a special sense with reference to the gospel preachers. And that's true. But again, it's the same word. So the context is going to tell you if he's talking about an office, a deacon, servant, minister in an office that's been chosen, has certain qualifications, or if they just a person who is just a servant in the church, or if they are one who ministers. Because the word minister is a servant. In other words, we talk about our ministry. People will talk about this is my ministry, is handing out tracts or things like that. Well, that's their work. That's what they're trying to do. But we don't use those terminologies, more of those things they use in the denominational world. Paul not only identified himself as a minister, he also called in 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 5, Apollos a minister. Now remember in Acts chapter 18, Apollos was preaching and teaching there all what he knew, and he was converted. Paul urged Archippus to take heed to the ministry which thou hast received in the Lord, that thou fulfill it, Colossians 4 and verse 17. Tychicus was a faithful minister in the Lord, Ephesians 6 and verse 21, and Timothy had made a ministry. He was a minister. Okay? And so it's the way that we use the words, and I'll be honest with you, you go to a congregation, you pick up the bulletin, they say the bishops, or they'll say the overseers. And it's kind of strange because we always use the word elder, right? We say elders. And so or they may have ministers over there, and they're talking about the preacher. Always that would use the term preacher, and sometimes evangelist, but most of the time I use the preacher, or the word preacher beside my name. But we use them more so for identification, for our members understand about elders and deacons and preachers and ministers and so forth, but the religious world doesn't. Well, I'll say I think the majority of our members understand that. While the word diakonos, minister or servant, has a broad meaning, it can be and has been used in the New Testament to identify special servants. Deacons and the designations have been applied to gospel preachers to distinguish them from Christians generally. See, you have to look at the context, 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 5. See, that word, it'd say he's a minister there. Well, someone says, well, that's the same word for deacon, so he's a deacon. Well, we don't call them that. By the context, we try to make a distinction. Because we use the word deacon basically because there are qualifications for them to be in office in the church. But the preacher is a minister. He is a servant. And he must keep these thoughts fixed firmly in his mind, or he may develop the notion that he is to be served. And some think that that's what they're supposed to be served. And A preacher has to love what he's doing. Like I said, choose the work you love, and you will never have to work a day in your life. I don't care what it is. I enjoyed a lot of things when I came back and got out from Vietnam, got out of the military. I went from job to job. I enjoyed them. I loved what I was doing, but I got bored. But I never got bored preaching and teaching. Now, my places where I had to work and provide for myself and still preach at a small congregation, I loved my work. I looked forward to the day where I could leave UPS or anybody else that I was working for and go back into full-time work. I was offered a job at UPS in supervision. I was going to take the job, but the congregation called me and wanted me to go full-time, and that's what I did. I went full-time with them. So you have those. Is the servant, let's see, let me go back here. Preachers, like children, may be spoiled. Someone has observed that spoiled preachers tend to wine, dine, and recline. Like somebody says, they calls it, Linda, is Bobby, where's Bobby? She said, well, he's in his office. I said, okay. Or they'll call say, Linda, where's Bobby? Says, he's on visitation. Well, they didn't realize office is the name of my bed and visitation is the name of my boat. So, and so I was doing something other. But there's some preachers that way. I remember elders at the place down in Alabama there, the congregation that came out of the Baptist church, the elders wanted me to go fishing with them. So I went fishing with them on Sunday night. They say, hey, we're going to go fishing tomorrow. You want to meet us down here at the church building, or you want to pick you up at your house at 7 o'clock? And I said, sure. Well, then on Wednesday night, they came back to me and said, we're gonna go fishing again tomorrow. You want to go with us? Well, it's the elders. I said, well, we went fishing Monday. I got things that no, you need to take some time off. So I go fishing with the elders. And one of the deacon's wife complained that I was spending too much time fishing. So, I said I was with the elders. We talked about the work of the church. But there's some people that way. They may demonstrate immaturity and financial responsibilities to the embarrassment of the church. I know a preacher, like I said, when he left there, he owed $900-something on a telephone bill. The church had to pay it because they didn't want to have a bad reputation in town. Preachers may think the brethren should cater to their every whim and fancy. When you have to love elders. When you have elders and they come to you and they ask you point blank, how are you doing financially? How's you and your family doing? Do you need anything? Because they don't want you to leave. They want you to stay there, especially if the work's going good and you're a good preacher. You're mastering your task as a preacher and a teacher of the Word of God. They don't want you to leave, and then so they're going to try to take care of you. And like I said, I've been blessed. Is the servant greater than his Lord? What was the Lord's philosophy relative to that of service? Matthew 20, verse 28. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. And remember, Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. That was a lowly responsibility. I want to say that was a responsibility that a woman would take back in the Old Testament times when he come in, that she would wash the feet of her visitors. I think that's the way it was. And so he did that. And so he didn't come to be ministered to. He came to minister himself. And so we as preachers do that. Preachers needs to realize that he is first and foremost the Lord's servant. And we should never, ever forget that. The preacher must serve the Lord with, Acts 20, verse 19, with all humility of mind. A cocky, proud, vain, arrogant preacher is a poor example of the one who is meek and lowly in heart. Worldly motives of human attention, notoriety, praise are a disgrace to preachers and preaching. I went to a place one time and they said something along the lines about a lectureship, and I said, I'll preach on lectureships or give a lecture on lectureship, but I don't have to do that. I enjoy local work. I said, I'm a local preacher. That's what I am. I said, I'm not one of these fellows who wants to go around and lecture all the time. Now, as I got older, I'm doing what I said I would do as I got older, and that was to teach at a school of preaching. That's what I wanted to do as I got older. And when I retired, so that's what I done. We had some good instructors at the Memphis School of Preaching, and majority of them they were on Social Security. Now some of them was being paid by other congregations, but mainly they were on Social Security. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, spend my time doing this. One should have the humility of Paul, who, in view of the greatness of preaching, could be constantly aware of his own unworthiness to be a minister unto Christ. Ephesians 3 and verse 8, he says, unto me, who am less than the least of all the saints, is this grace given, that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. The humility of Paul. The humble servant of Christ magnifies the master and minimizes himself, for we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 5. Preachers get compliments. They'll say, well, you're a good preacher. You're a good preacher, like that or something. And so we have to come back sometimes and says, well, I do the best I can. Or I appreciate what you have to say. I mean, I try to respond no matter what they say. If they tell me I'm the worst preacher they ever heard, so well, thank you. I appreciate that. I had a fellow one time told me that something or other along that line, and I told him, I said, well, I'm here to please God because I know I can't please every human being. And he laughed about it. He thought it was funny. But there are riches that cannot be searched out or even fathomed by man. And these riches are no doubt spiritual riches. That is the gospel. Spiritual things are infinitely more valuable than cardinal things. Matthew 16:26, what shall you give in exchange of your soul? If you gain the whole world, lose your soul, Jesus said. So Paul was keenly aware of the grace necessary for God to have appointed him, as he states in 1 Timothy 1, beginning verse 12. And he emphasizes through Christ, he says, that I gain my strength. Philippians 4, verse 13 there. Now, Brother Miller goes on and writes, he says, when a minister forgets that his message is infinitely greater than himself, he is unworthy of the name and the work he does. Rather than possessing an inflated sense of our worth to the Lord's cause, we should possess inexpressible all that we could be used of him at all. I don't know how others do, but sometimes at night when I lay in my bed, I stop and think, the person I was and the person that I am. And thankful, all the people that I met, members of the church that were so good to me. I had mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters in just about every place that I've been, And still, I remember I went way out in Arkansas and preached in a meeting. These people were 100 and something miles away, and they left and they came all the way up there. And here they come out. I remembered them. I couldn't remember their names, but I knew their given name, their last name. And they came all the way up. They said, we haven't seen you in 30 years, like that. And I appreciated that they come, but that's the type of people that you have in the church, as that of a preacher, that love you, they care for you, they'll do anything for you. Preachers must really put the Lord first, others second, and self last. That's being selfless. Paul, I may ought to, insert there, because I had a family, I was married, and I had children. And you have to make sure that you have a balance. I try to put it this way, and I don't know if this is the best way, but a third of the time, I'm a preacher. A third of my time is doing my preacher work, okay? A third of my time is doing my family work, and a third of the time is, I would say, my church work. Okay, I have church work, family work, and then I'm a preacher, my occupation. And everybody has that. You just stop for a moment. If you're a Christian, a faithful Christian, involved in church with the work of the church, everybody has it that way. Now, sometimes when I was doing personal work in different places like that, sometimes I may be giving 40% to church work and 40% to my work, 20% to my family. But like I said, I've had elders and men in congregations says, you need to slow down or something like that. And you appreciate people that way because they see, or like my wife would tell me, says, I think you need to spend some time with us. You've been gone so long, so many times this week. So, and so we'd do things. We'd have people come and get our children on Friday nights and tell me, says, you and Linda go to a movie, or you and Linda go out to eat, and you love people that way as a preacher. Paul and Apollos were ministers by whom the Corinthians believed. And 1 Corinthians 3:6, the human or the inspired historian informs us that many of the Corinthians believed, hear and believed and were baptized. Acts chapter 18, verse 8. One is not left to speculate relative to the faith-producing message which the Corinthians had heard, because Paul plainly said that he had preached the gospel to them in 1 Corinthians 15, 1-3. Were they perfect? No. Did they have problems? Yes. And he stayed there for 18 months. And then still, as he stayed there, I mean, he preached and taught this, but yet all of a sudden within another year, he was getting questions from me. See? So he did a great work, but they didn't grow it as they should grow. Ministers today are often caught between the demands of God and the expectations of man. I'm here to please God. I go to worship to please God. I teach people to please God. I do this to please God. This is, this is the work. Again, Brother Miller says ministers are frequently torn between what God requires and what people expect of him generally. If he spends a great deal of time at study, he is criticized for just sitting in his office, not being a good personal worker. If he spends so much time visiting as to neglect his service, he is criticized because his lessons are shallow and reflects too little preparation. So the modern minister is like Paul in a straits between the two. But whether you want to stay here or you want to go ahead and be with the Lord, that's what Paul wanted. But that's the same way. I mean, after you, and so you have to be, I guess, hard-shelled in some ways, but there is a way of talking to, if you have elders, talking to the elders about the word. Are you satisfied with the work that I'm doing? Can you see where I need improvements? You ask, and because of the work that you're doing. Ministers are often expected to do many things today which prevent them from doing the kind of study necessary to preach the word. More unfortunately, however, is the preacher who relinquishes releases the busy work and the appeal of action in preference to the preparation of persistent preparation necessary to preach the gospel. We have to have time to preach the gospel. I remember a preacher, and we were in school preaching, and I remember, hey, so-and-so got fired. I said, what do you mean got fired? I thought he was doing a good job. He got out of school, and he'd been there for, I guess, a couple of years. His first located work. And they said, no, said he wasn't studying. Said he'd get his sermons up on Sunday morning Bible class, and Sunday morning sermon. He'd get it together on Saturday, and then between Sunday morning and Sunday night, he'd do his sermon for the afternoon. I said, and we were taught that if you're preaching, you need to start on Monday to if you want to take Monday off. Most preachers did, but you need to start right quick to what you're going to preach, and you try to have what you're going to preach ahead of times. And that's the reason why sometimes people I like on Sunday nights to preach a number of lessons, like building the biblical character, and have about 6 or 7 lessons on that. And so people, they would help people in that way. If brethren would become dedicated to their jobs they expect preachers to do, it would not only be good for preachers, it would also be good for the brethren. If preachers would demonstrate patience and discover the means of involving the brethren in many tasks before the preacher and the church, it would be to the benefit of the preaching of the gospel. It would add blessings to the lives of brethren who receive the joy that comes from teaching the lost, restoring the fallen. We had a fellow who I taught him how to teach the lost, and I said, now it's time for you to go by yourself. You set up your own Bible studies, And so he did, and he baptized his cousin. And now his cousin is an elder in the church, and I want to say some of his children, the cousin is some of his children are preachers, but that fellow that I encouraged to do it, he's a preacher too, and his sons are preachers. So you never know. See, we're just encouraging people to do those things, restore the fallen. Being this fellow that became a preacher, that's what we did begin to. Then we started studying with people, and so. Converting the era, visiting the sick, comforting the dying, publishing the bulletin, advertising the meeting, cleaning the building, mowing, accompanying the young people to a program, carrying food and clothing to the poor, and many similar other type things that are service. There's a lot of things to do in the church. The duty of the minister of the gospel is to preach the gospel. That's his work. And this work must take precedence over all else. Now, we have to remember also, we are a member of that congregation. I had somebody ask me that. I saw in on the preacher's page that someone was asked, is the preacher a member of the congregation where he preaches? I just shook my head. I said, I'm not even going to answer that one. Yes, he's a member. He's under the eldership. They have elders. He's under the eldership there. I don't know what he was thinking. Brother Miller pointed this out. He says, God has not laid upon the gospel preacher, the duty of being the chief visitor, greeter, publicity agent for the congregation. Neither should the church make these demands on him. And brethren must be educated to appreciate the fact that the preacher's task is to preach, not to be a professional social worker for the church, which we read long ago. So then there's the challenge that we have. We've got a great challenge. We got 19 minutes to finish the challenge. The challenge before the preacher may be very simply stated. Brother Holland stated this way. He says, how can one do the work of an evangelist and make full proof of his ministry when so many demands are made on his time and so many of the brethren obviously do not understand the nature of his work? Now, sometimes we have, most likely we have the elders and probably the deacons, and they understand that, they have works, things they have to do, and you have Bible school teachers, they have things they have to do. Sometimes you have people who are not really, they're always at services, but they're not really involved in doing other things, and they may want to come by and just sit around and talk, and most of the time, if I was studying something or another, and I've had a secretary once, and I would close my door. If my door was closed, she says, "Well, he's busy," because I kept it open all the time. She was in the other room, and our room's connected. But if I closed my door, she knew I was doing something, and I didn't want to be disturbed, and so. So you have to learn, but you have some people that's, they think that's, you're not doing anything, but you are doing something. There must be more preaching about preaching. There must be more teaching done and then about the nature of the preacher's work. And I think it's good sometimes that the elders will see if that's what's taking place with among, that seems as not, I don't like to use this word, but I do it this way. If there are members that are, quote, wasting the time of the preacher by whatever they're doing, then there might be times where elders are to get up and talk about the preacher and the work that the preacher is doing, what his responsibilities are, that type of thing, and then turn right around and what the responsibilities are for members of the church toward that preacher. I do that in reference to that when we appointed elders. The elders has this responsibility, but we as members have this responsibility to our elders. We have this responsibility to our deacons. We have this responsibility to our preachers, and they need to understand that we have responsibilities. The preacher has responsibilities, the elders have responsibilities, the deacons have responsibilities, Bible class teachers have responsibilities, but all members of the church have responsibilities toward each one of those. So again, 1 Timothy 4 verse 13, we talked about this passage before, to reading, that is to gain that of a knowledge, again, to owning reading. So it means to persuade, to know well, to gather exact knowledge. Notice the exact knowledge. To read, it means to read. Also reading aloud with comments, that's like teaching a Bible class. And so Bullinger says this in his book. He says Bullinger is a book of synonyms, and he says, let him that readeth means let him who reads and comments on these words in the assembly take care to understand them. It explains also 1 Timothy 4 and verse 13. Be able to explain the passage. I had somebody ask me a question just recently, and I told them, I said, look, we're going to have to, there's a harmony of the Gospels. I said, we're going to have to read the other two passages because the one you're choosing doesn't give me enough information to try to tell you what he's saying there. So also to exhortation, that is we entreaty, we exhort, we admonish, we encourage. And a lot of times people want to admonish, but that means also encouragement, we got my nephew's leading singing, and he's an alto singer, but he's leading singing for me at Fairmount, and he tries. And I was so thrilled this past week. He tried a song he didn't even know. He tried to learn it before. He led it, and the members of the congregation went up and told him how much they appreciate him leading singing and him trying to lead songs he didn't know. Now it made me feel good that they did that, and it made him feel good too. Also to teaching, and that means in giving instructions, that which is taught doctrine. Many sermons that have been preached in many classes have studied the work of the elders. You'll do that if you go to a place and you're gonna appoint elders and you want a good outline. You let me know and I'll send it to you. Because I read all kinds of books, put everything together for this because I didn't get tired of talking about qualification. But after a while, some people you're not going to convince them in reference to some things, and so but deal more with that of the work. Here's the work that they got to do. So evidently, someone knew the importance of this office. There's the same reason it should impress one with the necessity of preaching sermons about preachers and the work of the minister. We started a training class at Cartersville, and it was so funny because eventually they had to get a sermon, and they had to present that sermon on either Sunday night or on Wednesday night for the devotional. Okay, and you could stand at the back door, myself and Mike Guilford and Brother Jerry Bohannon, because we're all three have been preachers, and also the other brothers that we had preached full time too, Brother Carver and Brother Brooks. They'd come out and shake our hands after they had made their talk on Sunday night or made their talk on Wednesday night. They'd shake our hands and say, now I know what y'all go through just to get up there and speak for 10, 15 minutes. I been studying for 2 weeks to do that. So they didn't understand. It takes a lot of work. So anyone who would deny that preaching is a biblical subject reveals his ignorance of the scriptures. And so, will people know the truth on this subject unless they're taught? People who that should just people there. It's a mistake. People who come out of denominationalism with the pastor system are not taught the true conservative work of evangelists. Should be surprised, or should we be surprised that they transfer to the gospel preacher this concept of a denominational preacher? That's what they think. I mean, I have them call me a pastor all the time. I had one here just recently called me a pastor. I said I'm not a pastor. Elders need to be encouraged to function as pastors and shepherds, and the elder should be ashamed to demand that a preacher attempt to convert an erring brethren that the elder will not take the time to see and try to restore himself. Preachers need to encourage elders to watch for their souls, Hebrews 13:15, and commend them to the church when they do. That is, get up and say, we appreciate our elders very much for visiting those who have wandered away, and our elders at Cartersville do that. Preachers also need to teach the church to respect them. Preachers need to urge elders to to seek out aspiring, competent, dedicated people whom they may assign the task of publishing church bulletins, working with young people, carrying food to the poor, etc. Then preachers need to recognize the people who so serve and give them the proper credit. And our preacher does that. He'll let it be known about what the other people are doing, and that's good. Preacher must develop methods for utilizing their time. They must strive to excel in the art of self-discipline. Very few people have more opportunities to waste time than do preachers. They do not work within the limits of a time clock or under the eye of a foreman, nor do they work within requirements of production. The preacher's alternative to self-discipline is self-destruction. Now, the thing of it is, I have worked here. They do not work with the limits of a time clock. I worked on a time clock. Or under the eye of a foreman, I have a foreman. Nor did they work within requirements of production. I worked at a place where you is on production. And so I've done all of those. And so there are no magical push button devices for saving time and developing self-discipline. However, the following suggestions will, when properly implemented, should be of great value to the preacher. We'll do what we can, and in 10 minutes we'll stop. Ephesians 5, verse 16, redeeming the time because the days are evil. We talked about, I want to say we talked about this before. The idea there is to redeem, that is by payment of a price to recover from the power of another, to ransom by or off, to buy up. Now I didn't put the italics there. In the middle, it means to buy up for oneself, for one's use. And so it explains a number of things. When a Christian looks carefully how he walks, he is redeeming the time for his benefit, for his own benefit. He's looking at how he's walking, even physically walking, or from the standpoint of a spiritual, walk. Also, there's some comments there made by Trench in reference to that. He says, examples of such decisive events in history include the noisy end of the old Jewish dispensation. We are redeeming the season or the opportunity. So we need to redeem our time. When we walk in wisdom, we are redeeming the time. Colossians 4, 5, and 6. So walking in wisdom is the same as looking carefully how we walk. Note that the word translated there, walk, above carries the idea of how one lives. That's the idea. When you walk in this, you live according to the word of God. Therefore, walking in wisdom entails walking or living according to the will of God. Also, the word there is found in Galatians 3, verse 13, chapter 4, and verse 5. And so it tells us what all down through there. He gives us a lot of things there does. I'm going to skip over that because we've mentioned that. Christians must put on the whole armor of God, Ephesians 6:13, in order to withstand the Satan in the evil day. And that's what one is supposed to do, because of the devil is after us. He doesn't give up. We're tried in every way. And so we need to always understand that and be able to, or be willing to study and make the application to that. So redeem means to buy back. There is no casual thing, not just incidental. The things are evil, and the wise things to do is to walk, redeeming the time, buying up all opportunities which are on the positive side. To walk with a casual care or negative attitude, such as, well, there will be other times, not now, is an attitude not designed to redeem the time. In fact, the greater the evil, the greater the need for walking wisely, buying up the opportunities now, today, not next time. And so there are opportunities come and go, but once an opportunity is gone, it's gone. My stepfather, I wanted to teach him the truth. And I prayed that he'd live through what he was going through, and he did. And he got out, and I went out and visited with him, and we talked a little bit, but I never told him the truth. He died about a week after he got out of the hospital. And it bothered me. It still bothers me, because I could have taught him the truth. There may be other similar opportunities, but when time and opportunity have passed, those particular opportunities are gone forever. And so we need to redeem the time. Buy while buying is good. Time and opportunities are very relevant. They are inseparable. So how much time do we have? It is well to plan for tomorrow, the future, but it must be understood that today is today. That we have, and we are ready for. Are we ready for today? Have we been buying up opportunities for today? If not, the opportunities may pass without recognition and attention. My ex-son-in-law is an unfaithful member of the church, and he writes me all the time. He'll write something or other, and he tells me how much he loves me and appreciates me and that type of thing. He's unfaithful, and he'll always ask me to pray for him, and I always write back to him and says, I am praying for you, love you too. So just a little bitty note, back when he writes anything to me, because I want the door to stay open. I loved him. I didn't like the way that he treated my daughter, but I love him because of his soul. So time means nothing to God, and we have to understand that. This label of time, it passes away, is indelibly stamped upon everything man possesses, regardless of the cost, regardless of the sentimental attachments we have, regardless of the plans for the future. Everything has an inside label. It passes away. There's a time to be born. You recall Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 and 2, a time to die, a time for service. We have a time for service. How long? We don't know. And so surely when we stop and we think about those, we find that Jesus redeemed the time. Now, I didn't read all the other stuff. Y'all can read Time to Born. There, the Birds, the song the Birds had back in the 60s is, about Ecclesiastes chapter 3. If you want to just look that up, the Birds, I forget what the name of the song is, but it's, you can look it up. Matter of fact, the Birds sings Ecclesiastes, something like that, and hear the song. That fellow who plays that 12-string guitar on there can really play. But there's surely Jesus redeemed the time. He bought up all the time and opportunities. 3 years of personal ministry, and he died. A mark of time for every Christian as he anticipates the end of time on earth by reason of death is a divine statement. Blessed are the dead that die in the Lord. Revelation 14 and verse 13. Although time will terminate men's march of time on the earth, the good works of the Christian will have etched their marks upon the hearts and the lives of honest souls to bear fruit long after Christians have made their exit from this world and their works do follow them. It's really amazing to sometimes to listen to someone, and this fellow was a preacher at this congregation, and he made a statement 2 or 3 different times. He says, "Yeah, Brother Bobby used to tell us," and it's all like that. And so one of the members one time says, "This Brother Bobby you talking about, who is that?" He says, "Bobby Gayton," like that. And he says, "Well, he used to be our preacher." He says, "Well, he was my preacher too, and that's the reason I'm preaching today is because of his encouragement." As a matter of fact, he baptized me into Christ because he wasn't. His sister was a member, his family, mother and father were members, but he wasn't. And I baptized him, and he ended up preaching, and he's still preaching, if I understand. But that's the wise versus the unwise. Jesus nor his inspired apostles ever compromise divine truth to win a soul. You don't do that. Actually, what will be accomplished by winning a soul without truth? John 17:17. You're sanctified, set apart by truth. And if a person wants to obey the truth, then they have to do. If a person wants to become a Christian, they have to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and they have to repent. They have to have a change of mind, a change of heart that results in change of actions in their lives. They must confess or affirm that Jesus is the Christ, and they must be immersed. So that's what will sanctify them. Paul, who declared that he was not ashamed of the gospel, presenting the gospel of power, conviction, and without compromise, 2 Timothy 4, beginning verse 2. After firmly and uncompromisingly preaching the truth to the Galatians, Paul said to them there, in reference to the preaching that was done, that it should be remembered that it was that Paul, that same apostle, that was warning the Ephesians about being tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and craftiness, and after the wiles of error, he abolished that one might grow up in all things into him by speaking the truth in love. And so he is encouraging all those congregations in that area to do that very thing. Then you have the materialistic example. Active and alert business firms spend millions of dollars in advertising, buying up time and opportunities for prospective sales, not only for today, but also for tomorrow. For example, seasonable merchandise for spring, summer, and winter are in the plans, and purchase are made in anticipation of sales. So we see that knowledge of merchandise, and we're going to put a big old yellow line there, and that's where we're going to start. Any questions? All right, let's see. We're going to start there. That was on page 50. I'm going to quit talking and just hit highlight. Especially the latter part, we only covered 1.5 part of his lecture. We'll talk about what should be preached also next week. And we'll even quotes from some denominational preachers. And we'll start right there, number 9 on page 51. And you'll have all the notes because I'm not going to separate these where we got to. I'm just going to send all that I've got done there. I got this lesson completely finished, so I'm going to send it to you, and I'll start working on the next lesson too for February 28th. Oh, I mean for March the whatever, March the 7th. March the 7th, yeah. And let's see, is that March? Want to be March the 7th? Let's see. Let's see, Wednesday is the 1st. Next Wednesday is the 8th. So yeah, the 7th. Then the next week, it'll be the 14th. That'll be 2 days after my 75th birthday. So I expect y'all to bring me a piece of cake. Anything else?
You later, Bobby.
Go out. All right.